Hello everyone, it's Merlin here, and I am doing my response video to Styles Paulino's 7 Swordsmen of Anime tag. Now it took a while for me to actually think of a team of suitable swordsmen to use for this lineup. Now originally I was thinking about doing a list of the 7 greatest swordsmen of anime that I could come up with. But then I realized something. The legend of the 7 swordsmen typically is derived from the concept of 7 heroes coming to the aid of those less fortunate. So essentially, not only would all these swordsmen have to be rather skilled, they would have to be good people. So even though there were a number of villains such as King Bradley from Fullmetal Alchemist and Vicious from Cowboy Bebop that I wanted to put on the list, I realized that I probably couldn't do that. There are also a number of people that I wanted to include on the list, but I felt that everybody would probably have already covered them by the time I got to it. So there are certain characters like Roronoa Zoro from One Piece, as well as Mihawk Hawkeye, and Afro from Afro Samurai. Though technically I do believe that they are probably better swordsmen than some of the characters I'm going to put on this list, I decided that in addition to these characters all being essentially good people, heroes of sorts, they should be characters that I really like. Not necessarily because they're badass swordsmen, but because I like them as characters and they just happen to use swords and be good with them. So I suppose you could say that's sort of my slightly more unique twist on this particular tag. I don't necessarily believe that these are the 7 greatest swordsmen of anime, but this is a team that I would really like to see come up and work with each other, because they're all fairly unique. Starting off the list is Guts from Berserk. Now to be perfectly honest, I felt that throughout most of the Eclipse early on in Berserk, Griffith was technically a better swordsman than Guts, and I think it's actually debatable that he almost could be. While Guts is definitely a great warrior, he isn't exactly the greatest swordsman in anime. In fact, if you're talking about terms of precise skill, he primarily relies on brute strength and, well, berserker rage. The pun totally intended there. However, the greatest thing about Guts is not only that he is incredibly badass, but that he's an incredible amount of tenacity, in that the sense that he is existing in a world that is essentially dominated by evil. And even though he suffers greatly from the moment he is born throughout much of his life, facing all different kinds of trials, tribulations, and disappointments, he still does his best to fight against destiny and rise above it. Even though it might be futile, he has a strict code of honor that he continues to follow. Guts is just an awesome character, and a pretty badass swordsman to boot. The next character on my list is Genosuke-sama from Basilisk. Now, to be perfectly honest, Genosuke does have a bit of an advantage in the sense that even though he is a rather talented swordsman and one of the few characters in the series to actually be really good with a sword, he has a power which, quite frankly, makes this pretty much unnecessary against most opponents. However, when it matters, he's probably one of the best swordsmen I've seen in an anime series, and he's severely underrated in that sense. Not just as a swordsman, but as a main character in general. Caught between 2 feuding ninja clans, Genosuke really desires peace and is a truly good-hearted person, who also has a strict code of honor but only wishes to have a peaceful life with his love Oboro, and desires nothing more for his 2 clans who have hated each other for generations to finally come together and put their differences aside. However, when shit goes down, Genosuke gets it done. The next character on my list is Utena from Revolutionary Girl Utena. This series and this character are somewhat underappreciated in the YouTube anime community in the sense that most shoujos aren't really that well respected, or at the very least well known. Utena is considered to be a classic series in the sense that it broke many different bounds about the shoujo genre, exploring all kinds of crazy themes and being very interesting visually, and admittedly somewhat confusing narratively. However, it has one of the most awesome female characters in anime, in Utena, who must constantly face a variety of opponents to protect her good friend and possible love interest Anthe, who is the source of a sacred power that could very well change the world. Virtually every episode, her friend's life and the fate of the entire world often hang in the balance. Utena has to struggle not only with defending her friend and the world, but also with certain issues of gender identity, and is often faced with many emotional trials and tribulations. She's also probably the best fencer I've ever seen in anime, as it's somewhat underutilized. She gradually improves through the series and ultimately holds her own most of the time. It demonstrates that she is willing to make great sacrifices in order to save her friends. Next character on the list is also from a shoujo, my other favorite shoujo series, Escaflowne, and that would be Lord Allen. While Allen is the secondary love interest of the primary female character, he's also one of the most badass characters in the show. And though technically the main character of Vaughn is ultimately a character that I more enjoy and he is technically a swordsman as well, he usually relies on his giant mecha armor, known as the Escaflowne, to do most of his fighting. As we see early on, Vaughn is not really that adept at fighting with a sword outside of his Gaimelef, as the mechs are called in that series. It is Allen's job to essentially train Vaughn to become a better swordsman and a better defender of his kingdom, as well as being essential to his development as being someone who can fulfill the destiny of his people, protect the woman he loves, and save the entire world. Allen is probably one of the best sensei characters in an anime series, especially when it comes to sword fighting. As far as being a defender of truth and justice, he actually gets a lot more done early on in the series than the primary characters themselves. So in a sense, he really does do a great deal before the characters can reach their full stages of development. Lord Allen, ladies' man and master swordsman. Alright, now we start getting into some serious business. While admittedly they might not be the best, some of my favorite swordsmen in anime. Taking up my number 3 spot is Kanbei from Samurai 7. Initially when I was doing this tag, I was actually thinking about making a joke and just saying that the 7 swordsmen were in fact the swordsmen from 7 Samurai, which was in fact based upon the film The 7 Samurai, which was in turn based on the legend which the tag was based upon. So I could have just cheated because all the characters there are great and all of them are actually badass swordsmen, or spearsmen in the case of some, in their own rights. However, easily the most badass is their leader, Kanbei, a repentant individual who technically never won a battle in the various wars that nearly tore the country, or I guess in this case, the universe apart. Kanbei is honestly probably one of the most underrated swordsmen in anime. He has strong convictions, strong morals, and will go out of his way to keep his team together and protect those less fortunate. And although it might seem that Kanbei might be being a bit strict with some of his pupils at times, it is often the case that he is helping people find things out about themselves that they didn't realize in the most indirect ways. In addition to his incredible sense of honor and code of conduct, as well as the ability to see well into somebody's personality, Kanbei can slice entire giant robots in half with a single swipe. Very few swordsmen can say that. Number 3 is Kanbei, the leader of the 7 Samurai from Samurai 7. Moving on to number 2. This guy gets a lot of hate, and I think that people don't understand his character. Some people think he's bland. I really like this character, and he had some really badass moments. And that would be Jin from Samurai Champloo. Now, I will admit, you could argue that Jin might not be the greatest character, but he does have some character, and he does develop. A great archetype for the Edo period, and a great example of the Ronin samurai. He's something of the strong silent type, and he's rather stoic, but that really fits with his character. He also does care a great deal about others, and much like some of the other characters on this list, has an incredible sense of honor, and will go to great lengths to help many people less fortunate than he. When he makes a promise, he keeps his word. But despite my personal preference for the character, there's actually one reason why I do believe he deserves to be on this list of my 7 swordsmen of anime. And that is honestly that he is one of the most skilled samurai I have ever seen in an anime series. In opposition to his counterpart Mugen, who has a really, admittedly very interesting style of dancing around, performing various moves, imitating some of the berserker tactics of Guts, admittedly with a much smaller sword, Jin follows an ancient style of swordplay that can take an opponent down in a single swipe. And that is probably one of the most awesome things I've ever seen. Seeing him surrounded by dozens of men, intent on killing him, and taking them all down like it's child's play is just, well, kind of hilarious and surprisingly awesome. Jin, equally as badass as Mugen, just in a very different way. And finally, my favorite swordsman in the 7 Swordsmen of Anime tag. Drumroll please. And it is Rurouni Kenshin. With all the underrated and less expected choices, you were probably expecting me to go for somebody completely different. Well, in all honesty, even when I was going for my list of favorites, Kenshin Himura came up. And that is primarily for 2 reasons. Number 1, in his past, his rather tragic past, particularly demonstrated in the OVAs, Kenshin is probably one of the most badass and brutal swordsmen I've ever seen. He truly deserves his title of Batosai the Manslayer. However, probably even greater than this is the act of repentance he undergoes throughout much of his series, both in the manga and the anime, and that he, much like a certain gun-toting character with blonde hair, he has a strong desire to rid the world of violence and really believes that all life is sacred due to his past actions. And once again, in probably the most impressive demonstration of skill, Kenshin battles most of his enemies, even in some of his most difficult ones, and manages to defeat them without killing them. That is how talented of a swordsman he is. And if I was going to have a group of my favorite swordsmen together in one place, going on some grand mission, I would want Rurouni Kenshin to be their leader. Alright guys, I hope that this list was interesting and entertaining, and probably not completely what you were expecting. That was my pick for my 7 swordsmen of anime. Alright guys, it's been fun. And for all the people in the Green Clan that have not gone, I tag you. I also tag Live Life Otaku Mo, King of Kilps, Firefish Shanks, Anime Pro 100, Mr. Falcon Punch, and the Saiyan Elites. Alright guys, it's Merlin out. Have a wonderful day.